Welcome everybody to Act 4, discussing things from film, television, animation, and Japanese anime. My name is CL, and I'll be your host as we explore some of the various regions of the Twilight Zone. This will be the first of a multi-part discussion and assumes you're an old pro of the series, so it's going to be full of spoilers. Now, if you're all set to depart, let's talk about it. I think it's only fitting we begin with an episode penned by the man Rod Serling himself. After being longtime viewers of the series, I'm sure you've picked up on his position against bigotry, hate, and war. Well, The Passers-By is an impactful tale set around the latter, the Civil War more specifically. It opens to groups of men walking along a dirt road, and it's here we're introduced to a wounded Confederate Army sergeant who steps off the road and finds himself on the property of Lavinia Godwin.
Beautiful once, wasn't it? Three, I mean, man.
Once it was.
The pair sit and talk, and the sergeant strums a few chords on his guitar. And meanwhile, off to the side, more men continue down the road, day and night. Now, I'm sure most of us have to admit that the first time they saw this, they didn't catch what was really happening. For certain, there were some clues in the beginning.
There's blood on his cap. There's blood on Charlie's cap.
But I'm sure it clicked for most of us when the blind guy on the horse showed up.
I couldn't have missed you.
And then realize, okay, everybody's dead. All the casualties of the war, North and South. But it's when the final casualty that comes down the road is when I get chills. And if you've seen The Passers-By or even know your history, you know exactly who that last casualty is. So now let me ask you, what was your takeaway from this? And what do you think lies at the end of that road? As Rod says,
As we've already pointed out, it's a road that won't be found on a map. But it's one of many that lead in and out of the Twilight Zone.
the only other episode that would even come close to creeping me out as much as this would have to be The Hitchhiker. Even the title, The Grave, has a creepy ring to it. Our story here begins with Pinto Sykes, an outlaw who's gunned down by the men of a small western town. Next, we meet Connie Miller, played by Lee Marvin, a hired gun who arrives in town after Pinto's assassination. And apparently, Pinto had a lot to say on his deathbed, including some not so flattering words about Connie. He even said that if Connie so much as went near his grave, that he would just reach up and grab him.
But that if you ever come anyways close to his grave, he'll reach up and grab you.
Then Connie's courage is soon called into question by a few of the locals, and wager that he wouldn't dare go out to Pinto's grave.
Now, I'll bet you won't walk out of here at midnight sharp and visit Pinto's grave.
Now, before I go on, what do you guys think about that wager? Would that be easy money for you, or are you the superstitious kind? And do you think that Connie seemed a little apprehensive about going out there? Well, he accepts the wager, and of course it's on a dark and windy night. And I give him all the credit in the world for even thinking about going to a graveyard under those conditions, as I think most people would probably pass on that little trip. Now, once Connie's out there, you can tell he's nervous, jumping at every little sound. And to prove he was out there, all he has to do is put a knife in the grave, and therefore winning the wager. But then, something unexpected happens, and Connie doesn't make it back. The men he made the wager with go out to the graveyard, along with Pinto's sister, and find Connie's body lying next to Pinto's grave. One of the men, Lee Van Cleef's character Steinhardt, theorizes that Connie's demise came about through a combination of the wind and his imagination running wild. But Pinto's sister has another theory, which makes us question whether the dead can truly come back to life. You know what's always amazed me about this episode, as well as many others in the series, is that they tell these fantastic stories in a 20+ minute runtime, and with a minimum of special effects. It's a testament to what you can do with some good storytelling, and then allowing our imaginations to do the rest. This one is written by Richard Matheson, and this time around, we've got Don Carter, played by William Shatner, before he went on to star in another iconic show, and his wife Pat. They enter a small nondescript cafe waiting for their car to be repaired, and the booth they settle into is where all the magic happens. And we're given a clue almost out the gate that something unusual is coming when we glimpse the small devil's head on top of the fortune-telling machine. And as you know, devils are something we don't take lightly in the Twilight Zone. Just check out the episodes The Howling Man and Printer's Devil. Well, everything appears harmless enough as our man Don plunks a couple of pennies into the machine and asks some simple yes or no questions, and the pair act as most people would and dismiss his answers as simple coincidence. But then penny after penny, the episode gets weirder when it turns out to be one coincidence too many.
There's no question about it.
Gradually, we watch an obsession in Don start to crescendo almost completely out of control as he places his fate into the hands of the machine.
Listen to me. Please. If you love me, just listen to me.
No, you listen to me. This machine is predicting our future. Do you think I could just walk away from it?
It's fortunate that Don's wife turned out to be a voice of reason and talks him down. It's obvious the machine has some kind of power, and Don was almost consumed by it. I guess the message here is that each of us should be captains of our own fates, come what may. Here's yet another from the mind of Rod Serling. If you check out most top 10 Twilight Zone videos, it's almost guaranteed you'll find it listed. Because it's such a smart and insightful concept set in a quiet neighborhood with its people enjoying a nice summer day with hardly a care in the world. And now let's sprinkle in some of that Twilight Zone secret sauce we all love. Let's have a UFO soaring overhead, accompanied by flashing lights and weird sounds. We take that, and then we add in a few unusual occurrences.
Can't even get the car started.
And we've got the perfect recipe for suspicion and mistrust.
You scared, frightened rabbits, you. You're sick people, do you know that?
As it ultimately leads to neighbor being pitted against neighbor, and then culminates into insanity. This episode gives us a nice long look into humankind, and how we tend to fear whom or what we don't know or understand. And the fascinating part for me is that all it took was a small nudge for these neighbors to completely fly apart. Are we as humans really this prone to suspicion and chaos?
Their world is full of Maple Streets. And we'll go from one to the other and let them destroy themselves. One to the other.
And is our world really full of Maple Streets? Let me know what you think. Death Ship is one of those double-length episodes that show up around the 4th season. And it's another written by Richard Matheson. It also stars Jack Klugman, the only other actor who's appeared in as many episodes as Burgess Meredith.
Well, our ship is where we left it, just as we left it.
Death Ship tells the story of 3 space explorers, Captain Paul Ross, Lieutenant Ted Mason, and Lieutenant Mike Carter, on a mission to find worlds suitable for colonization. They then land on an alien world and make a horrific discovery. And what could be more horrific than to not only find an identical ship to theirs, but then going inside that ship and to find their own lifeless bodies? Needless to say, the discovery leaves them in a state of great unease. See, I like the captain here because he's all business and insists on finding some logical explanation despite the weight of growing evidence that would suggest something supernatural must be at play.
Let's go over this again and again because there's got to be an answer somewhere. Somewhere! First.
He's absolutely relentless in trying to get it to add up. While the other two men, they just want him to accept the terrible truth.
You're all out of explanations. There's only one left and you know it.
I know nothing of the kind.
But more recently related to other events, having to do with some of the less positive pursuits of man.
Death's Head Revisited is a bold episode and holds nothing back in delivering its message, all the while serving up healthy doses of much-needed justice. Here we have the misfortune to meet Mr. Schmidt, a cruel little man with an even crueler history, who returns to the Dachau concentration camp to fondly reminisce his days as a Nazi soldier.
All right, pigs, up. Time to greet the morning. On your feet, Phil.
He reflects on the power he wielded and all the pain he inflicted with that power. Though the one thing he didn't count on was that in the Twilight Zone, that kind of nostalgia can come at a price. Mr. Schmidt, formerly known as Captain Lutze, is forced out of his cloud of longing for the good old days to discover that the ghosts of his past have returned to mete out the justice I mentioned before. The victims of his crimes return as both judge and jury.
The inmates of Compound 6, Dachau concentration camp, versus Günther Lutze, Captain SS.
And a trial is held, and then a sentence is appropriately handed down.
How does their torment feel?
The thing I'd like to ask you is what do you think of the captain's punishment? Do you think that justice was served here, or do you perhaps think he deserved more? Let me know, I'd like to hear from you.
This is not hatred. This is retribution. This is not revenge. This is justice.
And before I end this segment, let me ask you, wasn't Rod's closing narration moving? I know they usually are, but this one, here's the clip.
They must remain standing because they are a monument to a moment in time when some men decided to turn the earth into a graveyard. Into it they shoveled all of their reason, their logic, their knowledge, but worst of all, their conscience.
Jason, I have been your physician now for 25 years.
There are times in the Twilight Zone when the right people get exactly what they deserve. That's what happens here when a dying man's family comes to comfort him in his final hours during the Mardi Gras. And what a wonderful family he has, each with glowing personality traits, all ranging from vanity to greed.
You know, Wilfred, I think the only book you ever read was a ledger.
They're like vultures hovering overhead, waiting for the old man to take his last breath and just swoop in and devour his fortune. Well, the good news is that Jason's not going to make that easy. Before they get to cash in, he insists that they wear some very odd-looking masks, all the way up until midnight. And the deal is if they want the money, then the masks stay on. It's not an option.
You shall wear your masks until midnight.
So after hours of discomfort and numerous complaints, it's at last midnight, and they get their wish. Jason quietly passes on, and now the money's theirs.
He's dead.
Now to just end it there wouldn't seem right, would it? Let's not forget, folks, what show this is, and that often means a nice twist, and ending strong. And it doesn't disappoint, does it? I mean, don't you just love how this turned out? Sure, Jason's family ended up with the money, but they also walked away with a little something extra, something they now carry for the rest of their days.
My name is Talkie.
Years before Chucky from Child's Play ever hit the big screen in 1988, there was Talkie Tina, voiced by the fabulous June Foray. On the surface, Tina appears harmless, but looks, as they say, can be deceiving. Take Eric Strader, played by Telly Savalas, for instance. Eric is a bitter and difficult man to both his wife and stepdaughter. And sadly, the stepdaughter, Christy, is the one who seems to get the absolute worst of it.
Will you shut that thing off?
But as fate would have it, Christy's got a friend in Tina. Because not only does Tina talk, but her head and arms move. And we learn she's got another feature that you won't find listed in her instruction manual or written on the box she came in. And all the fun begins once Eric's alone with Tina, as Tina's elementary vocabulary goes from, "My name is Talkie Tina, and I love you," to the more baleful, "My name is Talkie Tina, and I'm going to kill you."
My name is Talkie Tina, and I'm going to kill you.
Weirded out yet? Yeah, well, me too. But I have to be honest. The interactions between Eric and Tina are funny in some scenes. At least to me they are.
My name is Eric Strader, and I'm going to get rid of you.
You wouldn't dare.
Though there is nothing funny about how it ends. It's like I said, I get in a couple of cheap laughs, but when that ending hits, I am not laughing anymore. And for that matter, neither is Eric. Some of the best episodes, for me at least, are the ones that can actually extend beyond the borders of the Twilight Zone and into the real world. The Shelter is such an episode. It begins with a group of friends assembled together for the birthday of physician Bill Stockton. Everyone's laughing and making merry, all up till an emergency broadcast comes over the radio.
Ballistics early warning line reported radar evidence of unidentified flying objects flying due southeast.
So the worried group ends the party, and the neighbors head to their respective homes to prepare for what they believe is an incoming nuclear attack. Bill and his family make preparations to take cover inside their bomb shelter. As it turns out, it's the only bomb shelter in the neighborhood. And here's where things get interesting, because the friends who attended the party earlier return to Bill's house seeking refuge in this shelter.
We gotta get into a shelter. It's the only place we can survive. I don't have any room, Jerry. There's not near enough room or supplies or anything. It's designed for 3 people.
Well, soon after, it swells into outright disarray, as friends who were laughing together barely an hour before are now at each other's throats to survive, while trying to force themselves into the shelter. And much like the Monsters Are Due on Maple Street episode, we get an excellent look into human nature, as it explores what may lie within each of us when we're placed in an emergency situation, because the friends and neighbors here have come to reveal themselves as being everything from cowards to outright racists.
Nobody cares what you think, you or your kind. I thought I made it clear.
And then when the all clear comes over the radio, the friends are left with a fallout from which they may never recover. What are your thoughts on this episode? Do you think it's possible for the group to one day move forward together after getting such a close look at each other? Or is it completely beyond repair?
Marty? I went off my rocker.
Again, let me know what you think. Here's some of Rod's closing narration.
No moral, no message, no prophetic tract. Just a simple statement of fact. For civilization to survive, the human race has to remain civilized. Tonight's very small exercise in logic from the Twilight Zone.
We've arrived at our final one for this discussion, and When the Sky Was Opened. This is based on the short story Disappearing Act by Richard Matheson. Now, we've already gone over how the Twilight Zone deals out its share of justice when those deserving get what's coming to them. But we haven't yet talked about the times where it seems profoundly unfair or even terrifying. The episode Time Enough at Last is one of the first I think of when it comes to unfair, and I plan on covering that in more detail in the second part of our discussion.
That's not fair. That's not fair at all.
It opens in hospital room number 15 with Colonel Clegg Forbes and Major William Gart, a pair of space pilots who survived the crash of their ship, the X-20. Well, Forbes appears a little agitated, and the weirdness begins when he tells Gart that there was a third man aboard the X-20, a man named Colonel Ed Harrington. Forbes holds up a newspaper with a photo of he and Gart, and he insists that Harrington was once in the picture with them. Forbes then goes into a flashback, recalling he and Harrington in a bar having drinks together.
It's like I didn't belong here. Like if I was to let myself go.
It gets even weirder when Harrington enters the payphone inside the bar and never comes out. And then it's like he never existed. Anyway, we come out of the flashback and Forbes tells Gart that he suddenly doesn't belong.
Oh no. Oh no! I don't want this to happen! Phil, I don't want it to happen! I don't want it to happen!
Gart looks down the hallway and Forbes is gone. As Gart picks up the newspaper, he sees that it's just him in the photo now. And then not a minute later, we cut to the nurse telling the superior officer that room 15 is empty and can take 3 patients. And keep in mind that long before the now famous snap from Thanos, there was this episode. Heck, even the ship the 3 men piloted vanished. And I know I can't be the only one left in complete awe after this ended. Let me know below if this one creeped you out too. Well, friends, it's time to call it a wrap. Next time we'll venture even deeper into the realm between light and shadow. But for now, I'd like to thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you in the second part. So until then, take care and keep watching.